Hello everyone and welcome to Creative Walks. This is Pedro Bonatto, and today I wanted to talk to you about this theory that I thought about yesterday, and I wanted to maybe even get your input, see what you think. So I was watching this movie with my wife called Maleficent. It's the second movie in the series, so I don't know if it's named Maleficent 2 or Queen of something. But it's basically the second installment of a reimagining of this old story that was again redone by Disney. So these old fairy tales, these old classics, and they reshot it, this time with Angelina Jolie trying to be ugly. So ugly witch, but that's besides the point. But what I was thinking was how it seems that this moment we are right now, at least in popular culture, related to the rise of the internet, I was thinking, maybe what we are trying to do with all these new interpretation of movies like they did with Star Wars or Star Trek, or trying to recreate all these properties in cinema and on television, things that were, let's say, classic, or at least in some way related to modern fairy tales. What if this is sort of like the growing pains of the internet that is finally getting to this adolescent state and trying to get out of its infancy? And what I mean by growing pains is that maybe you know that like kids, when they start growing kind of fast, sometimes I think it's the rate of growth of either their bones or their muscles or something is not in line, so they really feel pain of literally growing. And I think that's something that is happening on the internet and with culture these days, with all the cancel culture and all the outrage mobs and all the conservatives versus the liberals and all those fights like used to have old men in the streets just gossiping about stuff and commiserating. Now we have that on the internet. So I was just thinking how it's interesting that our culture is in this flux, and I think in a lot of it it's because of the internet, and that's making us, at least making our artists, start to rethink these fairy tales and the stories. And I've seen a lot of people complaining, and I probably was one of them, how they are ruining certain old established fairy tales with new imaginings that are actually not very good. And I think I haven't realized this before I watched this movie. And I think, yes, it is true that the new Conan is not better than the old Conan. The new Star Wars is certainly not better than the old Star Wars. The new iterations of old things, except Battlestar Galactica, nothing really comes close to the original. They have nothing new to say. And usually what they're trying to do is to tear down whatever veneer of classicism there was there. For example, in this story of Maleficent, it's basically trying to reinterpret the old witch as being the bad character, the devouring mother in the Jungian understanding of those kinds of characters, but they're trying to reinterpret it, her story, through the lens of even, and bear with me, this is going somewhere, in the name of fake news, like the whole premise of the story is that the story you've been told before in the fairy tales you grew up with, they are not completely true, that that person has been fake newsed, like her story is not the correct one. There is more nuance to her life. And I think that has to do with this idea that we have now that we are not so innocent about good and evil, and they're trying to incorporate that even in the lower denominator in terms of intellectual pursuits, which is basically a Disney movie. And I don't mean to ditch it. I mean to say, like, this is literally the lowest common denominator we all have, and there's a lot of brilliance that comes out of it. But what they were trying to do in this movie and in a lot of other ones, like the whatever Jedi one that they did with Star Wars, the 8th installment, that they basically destroyed everything that was created before. A lot of people were outraged, and I remember me not liking it. But one of the things that I thought, because I saw this Maleficent movie, which is actually kind of cute and nice movie, was that if we see them as an era of movie making, with all the Mary Sues and all the characters that are these impossibly strong female characters that are like coming to against, let's say, the patriarchy and all those things, I think they are a necessary part that we need to take our yayas out in the complete opposite way of what has been done before, in order to actually create something that is more literary, artistic, that I believe will come in the next few decades. So anyway, well, I don't know what you think of this theory. I think it's kind of a convoluted the way that I said it, so bear with me. I'm literally thinking on my feet for this. But yeah, basically, I think modern culture is trying to reinterpret, re-understand our mythology, our common mythology. And by mythology, I mean our popular culture that sinks into every aspect of our culture, and it's not by chance. Like, even started with Frozen, for example, about having the woman as warrior concept, which is kind of a new concept, although we do have that throughout history. I think now it's something that people are struggling with, and they're trying to create they're trying to create stories that not only fit that archetype, but they're trying to see that archetype, and there will be a lot of failed attempts and failed results from that. But on my money, if you think of it throughout a few decades, it's actually a good thing that we are trying to reinterpret those fairy tales. And for the people that get like upset when people reinterpreted fairy tales and they're not this or they're not that, they're usually related to whatever they saw when they were kids, which is what got their imagination in the first place. For example, I grew up watching Star Wars, so to me the original Star Wars is the best quality movies. But I remember that for my nephew, for example, when he was about 6 or 7 and we were introducing him to Star Wars, he actually grew up with the new movies, not the ones that are right now, but the ones that were created in the 2000s by George Lucas. And to him, that's part of his memories, that the stories that were important for him were those. And I assume that there are people growing up today that they will see the new ones and they will think those are the good old days, right? So I think it's important to remember that fairy tales are always being reimagined. Even when you see classic Disney fairy tales like Sleeping Beauty or any other ones, or even specifically the ones created by the Grimm brothers, they have been so much changed in Disney's version that they would be unrecognizable if you see them in literary form about 200 years ago. And they were much more, let's say, violent and even politically incorrect. They would be much more related to what we would do today, I guess. So it's interesting to see how there is nothing really pure. Even when you check stories, that's the last point I'm going to make about this idea of fairy tales and mythology. When you get the story of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest known epic story, it's about 5,000 years old, maybe more. It's probably related to something even older. It was found in the 19th century by explorers digging in Nineveh and close to the city of Ur in Iraq, which is one of the first cities in the world. And they found, I can't remember, the Azerjanepal, it's the name of the king of, one of the kings in Mesopotamia, and he had this library, and they found many versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the interesting thing is that Gilgamesh and his buddy Enkidu actually appear in different versions, and throughout probably the span of 1,000 years of people telling that story, they changed. At first, Enkidu was a friend of Gilgamesh and he lived in the wilderness. In another version of the tablets, he appears as his assistant. So there's all sorts of ebb and flows, and that's what remained. Imagine how many versions of the story existed and what was created afterwards and what was actually reimagined for the contemporary times of ancient people. So anyway, sorry for the long rant, and this one, I actually don't have that much clarity on the thoughts. I just wanted to record this for you so you can think of a messy thinking process on the way. I'm sure I'm going to get back to this idea of mythology, but let me know what you think. And let me know if there are any movies you would like me to comment or review, or that might be something that would be interesting to do. So with that, I will see you tomorrow.